Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Spanish Media Diaries, where I talk about books, movies, any other media that I have been consuming in Spanish, usually only things originally made in Spanish. Let's start with movies today. So the first movie that I watched since the last episode is called Calladita, and this is a very interesting movie. I picked it with basically no information, just based on the thumbnail and description, and it is the story of a maid in a Spanish household. She is from, I believe, Colombia, but I will put it on the screen if that's incorrect. She is trying to get a work permit to stay. They are like a very wealthy family, I guess obviously based on that, and so you're just following her talking to her family back home, working in this household, navigating that whole relationship, being, alone in this country. And this was a very, very interesting movie. Apparently, I discovered after the fact that this was originally a short and that they went ahead and made a whole movie out of it or something. And I do think that this would have probably been better as a short. I didn't watch the short, but there wasn't necessarily enough story here to fill up a whole movie. But I did feel like the main actor did a really good job, and so it wasn't like it was hard to watch or anything. I don't know how memorable it's going to be. And also, apparently this is the first movie ever funded by Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin, it isn't a major part of the story, but it does factor into the story. So once you know that, the whole thing is kind of like weird. Is this like a prolonged ad for Bitcoin? But it did have like sort of, I guess, maybe you could say something interesting to say about social class. So yeah, just fine. Then I actually rewatched the movie Cinco Lobitos, and this is one of my favorite Spanish language movies ever. I originally watched it on Film in the US when I had a subscription to it, and now here in Spain it is, at least for now, I'm not sure how long, on RTVE Play. I think anywhere outside of the US can watch it on there, I'm not sure. I really, really love this movie. It is quite sad, and it's also definitely not a plot-heavy movie, so if you do not like kind of that film festival, kind of that kind of movie, then maybe pass on this one. But it's telling the story of a young woman who has a baby, her first baby, and I think they're married. They're kind of struggling to manage the household child-caring work balance, and she ends up going back to stay with her parents for a while, and so she's kind of, I guess you could say, like re-evaluating her parents and their relationship to each other, to her, through the eyes of an adult, and especially the eyes of a mother. And yeah, the whole thing is just very kind of subtle, sad, and also really effective, really poignant, I think. Then let's do books. So I read the short story collection Siete Casas Vacías by Samantha Schweblin. This is an author that I really, really enjoy. She is Argentinian, and she writes weird books, like kind of surreal, literally fever dream things. One of her books, one of her novellas, is called Fever Dream in English, and her books are not what I would consider like horror, like they're more eerie. I made a ranking on Instagram. I'll put it here if I can find it. So anyway, this is quite relatively short story. It's a short story collection, and it's relatively short stories, 7, I believe, and they are about families, basically. So that's kind of where The Empty Houses goes into, and it's basically about the weird dynamics or messed up things within each house or family or household. To be honest, this is not super memorable to me, but I do remember the first story actually quite well, and I did really, really enjoy reading these, and it is something that I would especially maybe re-listen to at some point, for sure. Then another short story collection I read, El Huésped by Amparo Davila, creo. This one, I do remember actually the title story really well, and I really liked it. The rest of the stories, I kind of remember some of them, but again, I really enjoyed this while I was reading it. I don't think that they are like top of my list short stories, but they are very unsettling, very weird, all kinds of strange elements incorporated in them, and the collection in Spanish has some illustrations, so that's very interesting as well. They are super weird and kind of disturbing. Then I read Tu nombre no es tu nombre, which is a nonfiction, like a kind of biography, almost like a piece of journalism almost, following the story in general of children who were kidnapped from people, especially like rebels during the military dictatorship in Argentina. Also, just the people who disappeared during the dictatorship, and in particular, one woman who found out that she was one of the kids who was taken. She kind of knew that something was weird about her family, I think, but she definitely had no idea about this whole thing, and she was an adult, I think like 19 or 20, when she was told by the government, and her family was in like the military establishment, because I think that's generally who got these children, and so she had even more kind of conflicting emotions and beliefs about it, because obviously she grew up thinking that all of that was not true, that people didn't actually disappear. And so yeah, I think it was a tough read. It was written, generally quite, like I said, journalistically, so not like trying to like be a super tearjerker, but nonetheless super difficult to read for sure. Definitely recommend. I got Kobo Plus exclusively pretty much to read this book because it's on there, and then the last two that I mentioned were also on there, and this was well worth it. Then for the book club on my Patreon, I read Lágrimas en la Lluvia, which is actually a reread for me. Kind of, it is a reread, but I listened to it a couple years ago, and I remembered in large scope what the book was about, but it was quite difficult for my level at the time to exclusively listen to, and so I knew that I wanted to revisit it, and I am glad that I did. I didn't love this by any means, but it is an interesting and relatively entertaining listen. It should have been so much shorter, and it's the first of a 4-book series. The 4th one just came out, so I may give the second one a try at some point. I do have the first 3 books because they came as a single ebook, and the 4th one is an audiobook on Storytel, so I have access to the whole series if I want to read it, but since I don't have an audiobook of the 2nd and 3rd one, I'm definitely not in any hurry to try it because it's way overly long. There's not enough plot for all of those pages, and so anyway, I didn't even talk about what the book is about. So this is inspired by the Blade Runner franchise, whatever. And so you are following a replicant who is a private investigator. And so in this world, the replicants have been given like allegedly full rights equivalent to humans. There have been all kinds of systems set up to try to give them as normal of a life as possible, but they will all still die at a quite relatively young age. So there's all kinds of like crises about like their mortality and stuff that it talks about a fair amount. But she is trying to solve this mystery of who is causing breakdowns in these replicants. And so yeah, the storyline was interesting. It just did not have nearly enough content. And also this book is written a little bit as if it was written in like the early 90s, trying to be really progressive in the early 90s. But it wasn't. It was written like not remotely long ago enough for some of the things that it does. Like it's hard to describe it without just fully going into all the details, but it makes comments about like gender and sexuality that like are trying to be like inclusive but actually kind of come off offensive. So yeah, anyway, it was okay. Then I read Mandibula by Monica Ojeda, and this was very interesting. So this is, what would you even call this? Like a fucked up women book. You're following a group of girls in a very like elite private school in Ecuador. I don't think it ever explicitly says that, but the author is from Ecuador. Okay, I had to confirm what the description says because I don't like to give away like much more than the description of a book, but it does talk about it. So we open the story with what is kind of perceived as like the ringleader of this group of girls, kind of a toxic mean girl type group, having been kidnapped by her language and literature teacher. Then you are following both that storyline and a past storyline in which you find out things that happened to the teacher that, you know, prepped her to be in this state, and the group of girls and all of the things that they got into. I didn't dislike this book. I think some of the things that it talked about were really interesting. There were some lines that I really, really liked. But ultimately, this didn't like strike any chord in me whatsoever. Like I just kind of read it and I was like, okay. Sometimes I really like the like good for her, like fucked up women stories. This one just like didn't particularly ring true to me at all, and maybe that's just my own like life experience, like the whole like vicious girls, like I obviously am fully aware that they can be, and I have had some experiences with that, but it just like nothing about this like blew me away by any means. So I would like to read another book by the author because, again, I did like the writing. I thought that the book was, again, unnecessarily long. So yeah, I don't know. It was also mid for me. Then finally, we have Esta historia no te la habían contado. And this is another nonfiction book specifically about history and kind of retelling some of the common like myths or false, like what would it be in, they're called bulos in fake news, like about history, things like super catchy things like let them eat cake or stuff like that. But most of them were from ancient history, like Neanderthals, which I thought that chapter I thought was really interesting. Sparta, the Spartans, like stuff like that, Rome. It mostly focused on ancient history, which is one of my least favorite history subjects. And so, to be honest, I did not like this book that much. It was interesting in some ways. It was a little bit educational, for sure. There were things that I didn't know about it, but I did struggle to keep my attention on it while I was reading it. So it was good if you like history. It has a very fun, like, engaging tone. There's illustrations in the book, but if you don't like history, I don't think that this book is going to draw you in like I was kind of hoping that it would for me. So it's one of those, it's not you, it's me. Then YouTube channels. I do kind of tend to watch the same YouTube channels all the time, and I try not to repeat things in these videos. So I do always put a link in the description to my Ko-fi, where I do have the database for all of the things that I've ever talked about in Spanish Media Diaries on Notion for $2. So if you are interested, you can check all of those, but also you can check out the playlist for everything that I've ever talked about here. But one that I assumed would be on there, but I was checking and it actually is not, is Clau Reads Books. Her channel name is in English, but she does make videos in Spanish. And this is a Mexican booktuber, I think maybe the biggest Mexican booktuber or Spanish language booktuber, one of them for sure. And I don't know how I never talked about her in these videos before, because I've watched her basically since I started learning Spanish, but she does read mostly fantasy, quite a bit of other things too, but fantasy is her primary genre. She also writes fantasy books, but she's just such an easy watch. Like, her videos are always so well done, so entertaining, not too heavy, not too much. You just kind of can easily listen to them. And then also Anita Metu. She is Cuban, but living in Spain, and she makes videos about living in Spain, being self-employed here, and before that, obviously, she was making a lot of videos about Cuba and life in Cuba, and so she does still talk about that, and I really enjoy her videos. She has not a super heavy Cuban accent, but obviously still getting some of that dialect as well. Then finally, a new category for this series is webtoons. I have always enjoyed webtoons, but I've never read them regularly enough. It was always something that like I'd forget about, and so I never had like finished ones to talk about or anything. And so the first one is not a native Spanish thing. It is translated from an English one, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And that is Todo Está Bien. This is translated from an English one called Everything is Fine. And this is like a horror weird one again. It's not super horrific. There's like people get killed in it and stuff, and there will be like little blood splashes and like fucked up things happen, but it's not like, I don't think most people would be like truly scared by it, but obviously that's to your discretion. But this is a world in which everyone is wearing these like big cat head things. Like some people say, oh, I thought they were bears, like in the webtoon, but I always assumed they were cats. And they have to like pretend that everything is fine, and trying to like get ahead in this world where like everything is kind of sinister. Nobody really knows like what is happening. They just know that like you can be basically excommunicated, or like something weird can happen, and so everybody's kind of living like the little Stepford Wives or something, trying to like keep this everything is fine thing. And obviously things happen from there, but I did catch up to at least what is translated into Spanish. Not sure if there's more available in the English one. There should be more coming out soon. I've read 3 seasons and we are starting to get into some answers, and so I'm very excited for when I will be able to read the next one. Then a super short one that I think is still coming out with episodes, but right now there's only like 10 or something like that. And this one is originally written in Spanish, and it is Mishinomicon. And this is like so I think it's written by a couple or group, I'm not sure, who rescue cats. And so it's kind of incorporating their cats into the story. So each of the characters is kind of inspired by a cat or cats, and then eventually it'll like show you the thing that it was inspired by. Anyway, so we're following 2 people who end up kind of drawn into this parallel world where cats are like life-sized and like in charge, and it's sort of like this mythical thing. It was entertaining to read. It's obviously very short, what is out already, and it wasn't designed to be a webtoon, so it's not like the scrolling like a webtoon. It's like a comic, so there's a page and then you scroll down and another page. Anyway, so that is everything for today's episode. I do have other resources linked below. Let me know what you have been reading, watching, listening to, etc. If you have anything super captivating to watch in Spanish, let me know, because I have been out of my watching things phase, but I will see you in the next video.